Hi, I'm Sean O'Neill, the Director of Formation for the Church of the Resurrection. This is the third talk in our series on Holiness and Wholeness. In talk 1, Liz spoke about the kinds of wounds that we can receive as we're growing up and going through life, how sometimes our response to those wounds can be sin, and how we can seek healing for those wounds. In talk 2, Father Steve spoke about barriers to healing. One of the main barriers is resentment against people who have hurt us. And Father Steve spoke about the importance of forgiveness for those people so that we can move forward into that relationship with the Lord. In this talk, what we're going to talk about is some of the lies that we believe about ourselves and some of the truths that we should be believing about ourselves when we confront what God really thinks of us. God is love, and God is constantly trying to break into our lives with love. He loves us, He loves you, He loves me, and He wants to heal us. He wants to heal us of all those wounds that we've gathered. And His purpose in wanting to heal us is to bring us to complete perfection in Him, to bring about holiness in our lives so that ultimately we can be united to Him forever in heaven. There are two main ways in which the Lord heals. You could say that on the one hand, He heals us under the surface, where His action of healing in our lives is hidden, at least for a time. And the other one is more obvious, where He points out certain wounds that we have. So let's talk about how He heals under the surface. Sometimes what He does is He manipulates, if you like, the circumstances of our lives to bring about healing. He allows certain things to come into our lives which allow us to respond in love for Him and to surrender to Him. Another way that He heals under the surface is through healthy relationships. You can see this in great friendships that we have, friendships with a spouse or with family members, which are great healing for us. Another way is through personal prayer. And this is a way that served the saints very well during their lives. Surrendering to the Lord in personal and mental prayer is a way in which the Lord can bring healing into our lives. Another obvious way that the Lord heals, as it were, under the surface is through the sacraments, especially the sacraments of reconciliation and the Eucharist. Again, another way that the Lord can bring about healing in our lives is through perseverance in trials. My own story is one of perseverance in trials. I suffered for many years from severe clinical depression, 14 years in fact. I actually had to give up work completely when I was stricken with this life-threatening illness. And 3 years ago I was miraculously healed of crippling clinical depression. And when I came out of it, the first thing I thought looking back was, wow, what a waste of 14 years. That's 14 years of my life down the drain. But as the months went on after my healing, I realized that what the Lord had done during that time was bring about a lot of healing. He had removed stuff from my life that I was incapable of removing myself. He stripped away from me many of the lies that I believed about myself and about other people. So under the surface, He was healing during those 14 years. Some people say that time heals. And in a certain sense that's true. In another sense, it doesn't necessarily heal. What time quite often does is allows us the opportunity to overlay the wounds that we have with coping mechanisms. So we begin to build a wall around our wounds so that we begin to look vaguely normal to other people. And we don't look like the crippled wreck that perhaps we are inside. So that's one way in which the Lord heals under the surface. Another way that the Lord heals is by pointing out certain wounds in us, by allowing us to experience distress or discomfort. Sometimes you see this when you overreact to something. A typical example is if somebody cuts you off in traffic. When someone cuts you off, your reaction may be to go completely ballistic, to go nuclear, to start shaking your fist and uttering epithets that you wouldn't normally utter. What's happening there? What may be happening is that that person who just cut you off is telling you something about yourself that perhaps you already thought. They're telling you, you're worthless, you don't matter, I'm just going to cut you off. Perhaps that person is pressing on an existing wound that you already have of rejection. And this is how the Lord works. He points out existing wounds in order to heal them. He allows them to come to the surface so that he can heal. There are 7 main types of wounds as defined by Dr. Bob Schuchts. The first one is the wound of rejection. That feeling that I'm unloved, I'm unlovable, I'm not wanted, I'm not desired, and I'm not good enough. Many of us suffer from this wound. And that wound can come about through individual events in our lives. It can come about through perhaps a confrontation with somebody else where we felt worthless at the end of it. Or even in an environment growing up where we were not appreciated or affirmed. We can end up with a long-standing wound of rejection. Another wound is that of abandonment, and that feeling that no one understands me, no one cares for me, I'm unprotected, and perhaps God has abandoned me. Sometimes this wound can come about if a parent is absent as you were growing up, or perhaps even if your parents were there, maybe they were emotionally distant. It can often come about if you grew up in a family where divorce was a factor, or even something as simple as an event in your life where you got lost, say in a supermarket or somewhere else, and you panicked as a kid of 3, 4, 5. You panicked because your parents weren't there. Many times situations like that occur and you think, well, I was a kid, it probably wasn't that important. People had much worse childhoods than I did. However, when you're a kid, you do not have the benefit of adult hindsight. You don't have the benefit of being able to rationalize what happened to you. And so when you're a kid, something like that may be huge, and you may carry that wound of abandonment through the rest of your life. Another wound is fear. Fear may come about, that feeling of being hurt or disappointed. If you trust, you're going to be hurt. And of course, that can come about if you've been betrayed by somebody or if you've been abused by somebody in the past. It can also come about if your parents were over-anxious. And again, there may be generational wounds of anxiety which you have to deal with. Another wound that you may have is the wound of shame. And obviously this may come about if in the past you've been ridiculed by somebody. But it also may come about if you have persistent sin in your life. The guilt and the feeling of frustration at not being able to conquer a persistent sin may bring about an increasingly severe wound of shame in you. Another wound that we may have is that of powerlessness. The feeling that we're powerless, weak, we're unable to change, that we're not capable of doing anything. Perhaps we feel trapped or stuck. Sometimes that can come about if we had a controlling parent or authority figure, or if we were bullied in the past. Another wound is that of hopelessness, the feeling that nothing will ever change and we will never have what we want. Perhaps we feel that life is meaningless and that we have nothing to live for. So one of the ways in which that can come about is if we have, in the past, we've constantly had our needs and our wants thwarted by events or people. It can also come about if we've been betrayed by someone. And lastly, the wound of confusion. That sense of not understanding anything, of feeling it's all up to me to figure things out on my own. And that can come about many times if growing up you had a disordered family life, or no one to mentor you or take care of you. Many of us experience those wounds as we're growing up or during our formative years. The Lord wants to heal us of those wounds. So sometimes He allows the current distress or discomfort to arise in our lives because He wants to focus on the original wound and heal that. Sometimes it's important to revisit the memories from which those wounds arise. One particular memory that I had, I was feeling at one point a few months ago a sense of powerlessness and frustration. So I went for healing prayer, and what came up during that prayer time was a memory that I had of being bullied when I was about 13 years old. The remarkable thing about that event was that I was actually bullied by a boy who was younger than me. When I was 13 years old, I was a kind of scrawny, skinny kid. This kid was taller, wider, heavier than I was. And so what he did was he grabbed me, got me down on the ground and sat on my chest. It was a rather painful experience and very frustrating. If somebody had come into the room, they would have thought that they were looking at a potato on a chopstick. That's what it looked like. But he didn't let me up for about 10 or 15 minutes, even though I tried my hardest. And I realized as we were praying that I still had resentment against that kid, even though it happened many, many years ago. And that was the original wound of the powerlessness that I now felt. So in prayer, we invited the Lord into that situation. And in my memory then, I saw Jesus entering the room where this happened and taking the kid off me and taking him away and talking to him. And then Jesus came over to me and began to speak to me of His love, His mercy, His forgiveness, His goodness. And so it transformed that memory for me. So now when I think of that memory, I can see Jesus in there. So there are a number of lies that we can end up believing about ourselves on the basis of the wounds that we've received growing up. And lies are, we think that they're coming from within us. I think I'm worthless. No one will ever get the better of me. If I trust, I'm going to be hurt, disappointed, or die. We think these lies are coming up from within us, and we think that they are the truth. In actual fact, many times they are suggested to us by evil spirits. So they are less something that's coming from within us than something that is attacking us from outside. So ways in which we can combat those lies is by renouncing the lie and proclaiming the truth. So what are the truths that we should be believing about ourselves to combat those lies? So what I'd invite you to do is just to close your eyes right now and listen to some of the truths that the Lord has told us about ourselves and about Him. By virtue of my baptism, I am a beloved son or daughter of the Father. I am loved, valued, wanted and desired, and I am precious in the Father's eyes. Jesus has said, "I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you always till the end of time." I am connected, understood, and deeply cared for. God is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, and my protector. Jesus died for my sins, and I am forgiven, washed, cleansed, justified, and accepted. I am worthy, not because of what I have done, but because of what Jesus has done for me. His grace is perfected in my weakness, so that when I am weak, then I am strong. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Because my hope is in Christ, I will not be disappointed. God is at work in me, and what he begins, he will bring to completion. I have the mind of Christ. The Holy Spirit reveals whatever I need to know when I need to know it. These are the truths that combat the lies that we're tempted to believe about ourselves. As we grow in holiness and we grow into perfection, many times there are obstacles in our lives. The purpose of healing is to remove those obstacles, but the end is complete holiness. So, in a sense, wholeness and holiness are the same thing. And sometimes when we encounter an obstacle, it's like being in a log jam on a river. Imagine you're on a river on a boat and there's a log jam right in front of you. Many of us look at the log jam and say, "Lord, I want this removed right now. This thing right in front of me, I want it removed." And sometimes the Lord knows that that's not the place to start. Sometimes he's like a logger on the outskirts of the log jam, removing a log that he knows is the key to healing. So it's worth being open to whatever the Lord wants to heal in us, and not just sticking to what we think we need to be healed of. He is the divine physician, and so when we come for healing, we offer ourselves to the Lord and ask him what he wants to heal. God does not see us according to our brokenness and our sin. When he sees sin in us, it sucks compassion and pity from him. Think of the parable of the prodigal son. We are his beloved sons and daughters, and he wants to be united to us forever. He's constantly trying to break into our lives with love. And one of the ways he can do that is through healing. Healing is a sign of his merciful love. Here's a quote from Romans 8. "And we know that in all things God works for the good, for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." So even what appears to be trauma and difficulty and disaster, he can manipulate into something that can free us from bondage to sin and death. Let us open ourselves to the healing touch of God, so that in due time we can enter into the heavenly courts with him and live with him forever. Amen.